The Great Gatsby, a story of love, dreams, and tragedy. It was the summer of 1922, and the world was alive with the energy of the Roaring Twenties. Jazz music filled the air, flappers danced the night away, and the American dream seemed within reach for anyone bold enough to chase it. In the midst of this glittering era, a young man named Nick Carraway arrived in West Egg, a small, affluent town on Long Island. Nick, a Yale graduate and World War I veteran, had come to New York to work in the bond business. Little did he know, his life was about to become entangled in a tale of love, obsession, and tragedy. Nick rented a modest house next to a sprawling mansion owned by the mysterious Jay Gatsby. Gatsby was a man of legend, a millionaire who threw the most extravagant parties anyone had ever seen. Every weekend, his estate came alive with music, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Celebrities, socialites, and strangers alike flocked to his doors, drawn by the allure of his wealth and the mystery surrounding him. Yet, despite the crowds, Gatsby himself remained an enigma, rarely seen and even more rarely understood. Nick's curiosity about his neighbor grew, and one evening, he received a personal invitation to one of Gatsby's parties. There, amidst the glittering chaos, Nick finally met the man himself. Gatsby was charming, charismatic, and oddly sincere. He had a way of making Nick feel like the most important person in the room. Over time, the two became friends, and Nick began to unravel the layers of Gatsby's carefully constructed persona. Gatsby's story was one of reinvention. Born James Gatz to a poor farming family in North Dakota, he had always dreamed of something greater. As a young man, he met Dan Cody, a wealthy copper magnate, who took him under his wing and introduced him to a world of luxury. When Cody died, Gatsby inherited a small fortune and a burning ambition to rise even higher. But his wealth wasn't built on honest labor. It was rumored that Gatsby made his money through bootlegging and other shady dealings. Yet, Gatsby's wealth wasn't an end in itself. It was a means to an end, and that end was Daisy Buchanan. Daisy was Nick's cousin, a beautiful and delicate woman who lived across the bay in the even more exclusive East Egg. 5 years earlier, Gatsby and Daisy had been deeply in love. He was a young officer stationed in Louisville, and she was a society belle. But when Gatsby went off to war, Daisy married Tom Buchanan, a wealthy and arrogant man who represented the old money elite. Gatsby had never stopped loving Daisy. His entire life, his mansion, his parties, his wealth, was all for her. He believed that if he could just amass enough money and status, he could win her back. And now, with Nick's help, he was determined to make that dream a reality. Nick arranged a meeting between Gatsby and Daisy at his house. The reunion was electric. Gatsby was nervous, almost trembling with anticipation, while Daisy was overwhelmed by the sheer force of his devotion. For a moment, it seemed as though the past could be rewritten. But Daisy wasn't the same girl Gatsby had fallen in love with. She was older, more jaded, and tied to a life of comfort and security with Tom. The tension between Gatsby and Tom came to a head one sweltering afternoon in New York City. The group, Gatsby, Daisy, Tom, Nick, and Jordan, gathered at the Plaza Hotel, where tempers flared and secrets were laid bare. Tom, sensing Gatsby's threat to his marriage, exposed Gatsby's criminal past, shattering Daisy's fragile faith in him. Daisy, torn between the two men, ultimately chose to stay with Tom. Gatsby's dream began to crumble before his eyes. The drive back to Long Island was a blur of anger and despair. Daisy, driving Gatsby's car, accidentally struck and killed Myrtle Wilson, Tom's mistress. Myrtle's husband, George Wilson, was devastated. Consumed by grief and rage, he was manipulated by Tom into believing that Gatsby was responsible for Myrtle's death. In the end, Gatsby's unwavering loyalty to Daisy proved to be his undoing. He took the blame for the accident, refusing to let her reputation be tarnished. But his sacrifice went unnoticed by the very person he had done it for. Daisy and Tom quietly left town, leaving Gatsby to face the consequences alone. The tragedy reached its climax when George Wilson, armed with a gun, arrived at Gatsby's mansion. In a moment of blind fury, he shot and killed Gatsby before turning the gun on himself. The man who had once been the life of every party died alone, his dreams shattered and his love unrequited. Gatsby's funeral was a somber affair. Despite the hundreds who had attended his parties, only a handful showed up to pay their respects. Nick, heartbroken and disillusioned, was left to arrange the service. As he stood by Gatsby's grave, he couldn't help but reflect on the emptiness of the world Gatsby had so desperately tried to conquer. In the end, Nick realized that Gatsby's greatest flaw was his inability to see Daisy for who she truly was. She was not the perfect, idealized woman he had built up in his mind, but a flawed and human one. Gatsby's dream was never about Daisy, it was about the idea of her, the idea of a perfect love that could transcend time and circumstance. As Nick left Long Island and returned to the Midwest, he carried with him the memory of Gatsby and the green light at the end of Daisy's dock. That light, which had once symbolized Gatsby's hopes and dreams, now stood as a haunting reminder of the futility of chasing illusions. The American dream, Nick realized, was just that, a dream, beautiful and unattainable. And so, the story of Jay Gatsby came to an end, a tragic tale of love, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of a dream that was always just out of reach. Why this story resonates. Timeless themes. The novel explores universal themes like love, ambition, and the human desire for something greater. Complex characters, Gatsby, Daisy, and Tom are deeply flawed yet compelling, making their struggles feel real and relatable. Social critique. Fitzgerald's portrayal of the jazz age exposes the moral decay and emptiness beneath the glittering surface of wealth and excess.